My Govanen, how have you been? I'm the Talking Shed, and today we return to rewriting the Rings of Power. In these episodes we'll cover roughly the same story elements as episodes 5 and 6 of the Rings of Power, so Partings and Udun. Let's wait no longer. Let's do it! Let's rewrite the Rings of Power. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that you may leave your observations and propositions for the story in the comments. All the relevant ones will be gathered in episode 5 of this series. Now let's quickly analyze the problems of episodes 5 and 6 that we need to solve here. First of all, Mithril and its backstory. It is essential to the creation of the Rings of Power, to the motivation of Gil-galad and other heroes. We need it to be logical. Second problem is Halbrand's agency. He is the villain of the story, so we need him to do more and to make more decisions that have their consequences. Another problem is the fact that the conflict between elves and dwarves needs to have some roots in reality. There needs to be a reason for it to exist. And elves need to get Mithril anyway. You may notice that some of the issues that we'll deal with in this episode do not correspond to episodes 5 and 6 of the Rings of Power. It's because we need to solve some questions earlier in this version of the story. Most noticeably, the battle between the orcs and elves and Southlanders will happen in episode 7, not 6. You may also notice that I have named fewer issues than in the previous episodes. Do not mistake it for there not being any issues or less issues. I dare say that there are more in the second part of the show. I also dare say that some of the solutions previously implemented already solve these issues. We open episode 5 in Eregion, where elven smiths and sages gather to find the reason behind the disease and to stop its spreading. There are many solutions that they propose, magic and old artifacts being among them, but none seem to stop the disease. Some only slow it down. Indeed, there are many ideas that are available, but none is sufficient. In the Southlands, in the Watchtower, we see the fugitives from the Orcish camp that take most necessary rest. But soon they will return to hard work. They need to gather necessary supplies, to prepare horses, in order to at least try delivering the message on the events in the Southlands to elves or Númenóreans. In Pelargir, we see preparations for war. Númenóreans mustered their forces, but we see their low numbers. The bulk of the force is supposed to be elves promised by Galadriel. Then we return to Eregion together with Elrond, who came there as soon as he could. He joins the discussion on the solutions to the problem of the disease. Then we see him taken aside by Celebrimbor, who asks him about the dwarven secret that Elrond promised to discover. There we see Elrond struggling. He didn't promise to be silent, but he knows that his friend believes him to keep this knowledge a secret. There is no need for oaths between friends, so he avoids answering the questions of Celebrimbor. But later we see him alone, looking at one shard of mithril that he has taken from the dwarven mines. Soon he may stand before a choice between the trust of his friend and the well-being of an entire country. Then we see the hobbits who are preparing to defend themselves and the stranger from the cultists. They are no fighters, but they can prepare traps, they can quickly disappear to mislead their opponents. They will not do much fighting, but they will rather serve as a distraction. It will allow them to confuse the cultists and for Stranger to defeat them with his magic. Then we once more go to Pelargir, where Galadriel spends time with Elendil. She gets to know him better, and she starts to see in him a better leader than in Halbrand. She meets his son too. Isildur has dignity of his father, but also a danger that she sensed around Halbrand. Isildur can be lured by the prospect of power. Back in Eregion, Halbrand is said to have prepared some kind of solution to the problem. But before he presents it, Elrond appears in the room where the disease is studied. He comes close to one of the magical artifacts prepared by the smiths. The artifact, a ring, was unable to stop the spread of the sample of the disease on other plants. But as Elrond comes closer, the disease suddenly retracts. Surprised by this, the gathered sages study the sample in presence and in absence of Elrond. Elrond's presence seems necessary for the fight with the disease. Elrond, for quite some time, tries to pretend that he does not suspect what may be the cause of this, but finally his shard of mithril is discovered and taken by the smiths for further study. Meanwhile, Halbrand returns to seclusion to work on his own idea. Then we see Arondir and his companions making final preparations. They have horses, supplies, they got rest, they wouldn't be able to get those things anywhere else in the Southlands now, but it would be impossible to escape from the watchtower at the moment. After Arondir and his companions entered it, the orcs have grown much more vigilant. The plan of the messenger's escape must wait for the orcs to put their guard down. Back in Eregion, after a thorough examination, the elven smiths are sure that mithril does not cause the disease to stop. Instead, it enhances the effects of other means prepared for that purpose. The magic, enchanting songs, and artifacts of oaths weren't able to significantly affect the disease. In the presence of mithril, however, they are able to fight it. After further tests, it turns out that more mithril is definitely needed, and it is theorized that a jewel created for this specific purpose would be able to stabilize the effect of this metal and put an end to the disease. Perhaps it would be able to achieve even more, keeping all nature inside immune to any harm, able to grow and be preserved. Nobody quite remembers whose idea it was, but later Halbrand, together with Celebrimbor, discovered that there are some gems that would make the project possible. Wherever mithril might be used, it is needed in much larger quantity. Elrond, having not revealed the source of it, tells other elves that he is going to find out more and search for more, and returns hastily to Moria. Meanwhile, Halbrand and Celebrimbor and some other smiths make preparations, plans of an artifact that could join the powers of mysterious gems and mithril. Then we go to Pelargir once more, where we see Pharazôn, and we get to know his perspective. He's the Chancellor and the leader of the nobles, the one who proposes not only to attack the Southlands, but the Southlanders too. We also learn something more about the Númenor itself. The old king is still ruling the island, and his daughter Miriel is replacing him in duties that he cannot perform anymore, such as visiting colonies. Then, in the watchtower, Theo reveals the mysterious sword that he has taken from Waldrek to Arondir, and gives it to him as a sign of trust. This causes Waldrek to confront Theo. He is furious at first, but then he tries to convince Theo that he has just disposed of the only way of ensuring safety to himself and his mother. The sword is much desired by the orcs, and they would reward anyone that would bring it to them. Now Theo seriously considers stealing the sword once more. Then we see Elrond, who returns to Moria and has heart-to-heart discussion with Durin. He reveals the discovered properties of mithril and explains how the secret of dwarves was revealed to elves. Durin is informed of it, but he finally is calmed and understands what happened. He is eager to help the elves. However, his father, who enters the room and hears the conversation, is less lenient. He reprimands his son for sharing the secret of the dwarves and distrusts Elrond for revealing it. Then we see the Southlands once again. The time has come to try and deliver the message. The orcs have become less vigilant, and the message can wait no longer. Arondir knows that the road through the enemy lands is highly dangerous, but he prepares to take it. However, his companions dissuade him from that decision. They'll put their hope not in their numbers, but in their swiftness, and they all suspect that an attack on the watchtower will come soon. Arondir is not essential to the delivery of the message, and he is more needed in the watchtower. The message would be for naught if the tower would fall and if there would be no one to be rescued, and Arondir is essential to the defense of the watchtower. He was the one that led the villagers and was captured protecting them. He is the one who miraculously returned, bringing new defenders and new hope. Finally, he is the one that organized the recent preparations. If he leaves, the Southlanders may very well give up. Arondir understands that, and finally decides that he will stay in the watchtower. Then we see a conversation between Nori and the stranger. The stranger is not sure that he will be able to fight. He's not so much in control of his powers. If he uses them, they control him more. He doubts that he will be up to the task. Nori tries to cheer him up, but it does not seem to help much. The stranger tries to adapt to a new reality. He seems restrained by his mortal body. He is doubtful of his abilities. Episode 5 ends as Elrond once more returns to Eregion. There he prepares for one last meeting with the Dwarven King, to try and convince him to help the elves. Halbrand offers his help and shares the project of the rings. rings that can not only protect nature, but also help to gather riches. Elrond agrees to present this project and to offer some of the rings that would be made in exchange for Mithril. Episode 6 begins with the elves and Halbrand visiting the Dwarven King. The project of the first version of the rings is ready for demonstration. At King's Hall, they are allowed to use a bit of Mithril to create the first ring. Halbrand works with other smiths and uses some of carefully selected gems that he prepared himself. The demonstration results in the creation of a ring. It is not yet a ring of power, but still a mighty artifact. Its capabilities surprise everyone except Halbrand. He has made a ring prepared solely for the dwarves, a ring that is compatible with the dwarven technique of resonating. If used with this technique, the ring is capable of pointing to the rich sources of gold and other precious metals. Even though it's a marvel, the king still isn't convinced. He claims that now he can make the rings himself, and he will not take an offer from spies and deceivers. All seems lost for the elven cause, but Durin has a private meeting with Elrond, Halbrand and Celebrimbor. He says that he hasn't seen anything like that ring. He believes that dwarves, in order to learn how to make such rings, would probably need elves to share much of their secrets. As it seems impossible, and seeing the persistence of his father, Durin offers to make a secret deal with the elves. In exchange for more powerful rings, he will deliver Mithril in secret. As Durin talks, he looks at Halbrand, suggesting that he is the one who made this proposition. Celebrimbor and Elrond, desperate to find a solution, agree. In the Southlands, we see a sally from the Watchtower, we see a skirmish that ensues, and finally we see 4 messengers that escape, and we follow them for a short while. Then we see Galadriel in Pelargir. She sends orders to her forces that stand near. They are going to move near the Southlands, they'll gather supplies to enter the land, and to wage war with the orcs. Then we see elves and Halbrand returning to Eregion. While they were gone, more preparations were made, and now more rings are made, rings of the kind that was presented to the dwarves. But Halbrand is not satisfied. He spends even more time in seclusion, working on another, even greater project. Then we see the villagers in the Watchtower worrying about the messengers and Arondir trying to cheer them up and preparing the defense. Soon after we see Theo, who is considering stealing the mysterious sword, but finally decides to reveal the truth to Arondir. Upon hearing the news, Arondir questions Waldrek. Waldrek reveals that quite some time ago he was threatened by the orcs and forced to help them. He was tasked with finding the sword and securing it for them. He knows nothing of the purpose of the weapon and tries to excuse himself, saying that he could either die or agree to help, and that he intended no harm. Then we see the cultists who enter the hobbits' camp. They are distracted by the hobbits for a short while, but after they set fire onto their carts, the hobbits panic and run. But then the stranger, seeing his friends in danger, gathers the fire that spreads across the carts and casts it onto the cultists. They retreat. The stranger finally understands that protecting his friends gives him control over his powers. He knows that the cultists will return, but then he will be ready. Then we follow the 4 messengers who try to escape from the Southlands. After a long fight with enemies, after avoiding them, hiding from them, killing them, only 1 messenger survives. But finally, he leaves the Southlands and reaches Pelargir. As the news from the Southlands reach, Galadriel and Miriel change their plans. They must attack quickly. To defeat the enemy in the Southlands, they do not need an entire army. A force of raiders may secure a foothold in the Southlands, defeat most of the orcs, and free the Watchtower. Then they will have to wait for the main forces of elves and Númenóreans, but it might be enough to stop the invasion of the orcs. So Galadriel sends to Eregion for all the light cavalry that might be gathered and sent to the Southlands. Episode 6 ends as Galadriel's orders reach Eregion, and several legions of elves leave the city. Most of the elven forces are infantry that will not reach Southlands in time. However, there is also a few hundred strong cavalry force. They will join Galadriel as soon as they can, and Halbrand is among them. As they leave, in a quiet discussion, Elrond admits that he is glad that Halbrand is gone. He has gathered much power in a short time, he is following his own paths and he seems to steer the events, all of which doesn't make him a desirable guest. Elrond is happy that Halbrand will either die or become a ruler of a distant realm and will not distract the elves in Eregion. Celebrimbor is of different opinion. He appreciates the achievements of Halbrand and guesses that with his own mastery and Halbrand's ingenuity, they would be able to achieve so much more with the rings. The last scene of the episode shows us Celebrimbor, who reads some of the notes that Halbrand left. These are the plans for something greater than the rings that were already made, for the rings of power. Now let's quickly analyze the most influential changes that were introduced. First of all, the stranger. He now has a clear journey that we can follow. He does not have to decide whether he is good or bad, but rather he has to understand his motivation and to learn how to help those that helped him. Another change is the cause of the conflict between dwarves and elves. It is the lack of trust. But there is also a reasonable solution, something that wasn't present in the Rings of Power. Another change is the fact that now there is a reason for the low numbers of Númenóreans, and in this version elves, that will fight orcs in the Southlands. They have to come there quickly. And finally, perhaps the most influential change of all, Halbrand and his agency in the world. He now is very much more active. He influences events, he causes many events to happen. And now we see his purpose. It is the creation of the Rings of Power. And now, I would be very glad to hear your own thoughts and observations. What do you think about this version of the story? Do you like it? Would you add something or remove something? What do you think will happen in the part 4? I look forward to reading your comments. And now, all that is left is thank you. Thank you for listening. See you soon. Fare you well. Nova Year. Episode 6 begins with the elves and Halbrand visiting.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.